what we're doing. So we're grateful that we've been on a roll here with testimonies, week in and week out. And I know there's an excitement inside of me with tonight's testimony with Kevin Cormier, because I'm aware of a couple of amazing things that are happening as we speak almost. And but also of a number of things throughout Kevin's life. We've been, buddies for a long, long time, and have cooperated and, worked together in a variety of ways. I'm going to just hand the ball off to Kevin Cormier and let him, share a testimony with us. And I just pray, Kevin, God's heart and soul, sings loudly through you. So go ahead, young man. Yeah, it's your night.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for being here. I have to fight the urge to be not serious at times because I like to laugh. So if I throw in a chuckle every now and then, well, like for instance, I'm up here in my bedroom because I've got a house full of people. My daughter and her husband, and they've got 2 cats. They've been staying with us because they're in the process of buying a house in Providence. So we've got a house full, and I'm kind of relegated to this quiet little room up here. So bear with me. Some of the material here that I'll be talking about will be a little sensitive and a little serious, but bear with me. So I was born in May 29th, 1962, and grew up in Dartmouth for the most part. Lived in Bedford for a few years. Grew up in Dartmouth, North Dartmouth, and we moved to Dartmouth right around the time SMTI was being built, which later became SMU and is now UMass Dartmouth, which was interesting because it was just almost a dirt road. Now it's a main thoroughfare going back and forth. But we witnessed a big concert when they had Woodstock. They had one over there too. They had a big concert at the school, and I almost got run over actually getting off the bus. But we lived in that area for 10 years until I was about 14, and had a lot of woods to play in, my brother and I, and it was a great time. My father was a house painter, and he didn't work much because he had a lot of nervous issues, and he thought he'd had nervous breakdowns, and he thought he'd had other things wrong with him. So turned out to be mostly agoraphobia, but he didn't find that out until years later. So we struggled. We were very, very poor. The house we lived in was a rented house. It was an old, probably built in the early 1700s. It was an old cape with very little heat, very little insulation. We had a wood stove. There were mornings in the wintertime, there would actually be ice in the sink. The wood stove would go out in the middle of the night, and whoo, it was cold getting up. But other than that, we had a good childhood. I had a good childhood. And I was about 14 years old. We moved. We had to leave that spot because they were getting ready to build. They were going to build what's now Target, and there's a Dick's Sporting Goods and all those in that area there. That was all woods. That was all my playground at one time. So anyway, we moved up the road off of Reed Road to Lake Nogachoke, and that was like a dream come true for me. I always dreamed about having a place where I could actually go fishing, and I loved fishing. And we ended up with a house right on the lake, and so right away I bought a little rowboat, a little skiff, and I spent hours and hours just fishing. I loved it. It was a great place to live, though, because we had, in the neighborhood, there were a lot of kids that were the same age group as us, and there were times there were 20 kids at my house. It was a great place to grow up. And because we were on the lake, we always had stuff to do year round: ice skating, water skiing, fishing, swimming, you name it. We had woods across the street, and Lincoln Park just down the street, which you younger people, it isn't there anymore. Around about 16, 17 years old or so, I met a neighbor of ours. She lived on Reed Road. And she always had these funny things in her yard. She had a statue of Jesus made out of a car chassis. Those of you who have been around for a while probably remember seeing that. It was up there for years. Her name was Stacy, and she was kind of an eccentric kind of person. She was a local artist, and one day she had some paintings out for sale on the front lawn, and she used to do that. Paint, sell. She said to teach classes, and then she put them all out there on like a snow fence out in the front, and people would stop and they'd sell the paintings. So I stopped in and started talking to her and expressed an interest in learning to paint. And she said, "Well, great. Why don't you start?" So I did. I started taking art classes with her, and I dabbled all my life with drawing and painting and stuff, but she kind of helped bring it out. And then eventually, after a few years, she took a couple of us. There was four of us that she started with that were kind of like she took under her wing as like almost like proteges, and it was three, and then it was two, and then eventually it was just me. Um, but she not only taught me how to paint, all the while she also invited me to go to church with her. And she went to Mullen Hill Baptist Church, among other places. There was also the church on Route 6 in Dartmouth, Calvary, I think it was. Anyway, and it was as I was 17, 18 years old, I had gotten to this point because I grew up Catholic, so we didn't go to church much. And I just I'd gone through the catechism and the first communion and the confirmation and all that. But there was an emptiness. There was something stirring inside me. I remember in high school, I had found this little pocket Bible that my mother had on her bureau, and it was the Good News New Testament. And I grabbed that sometimes, and I'd take it with me. I remember going to school during study hall. I'd go outside during study period and just sit down and read because I was hungry. There was something stirring in me. I didn't know where to go or how to satisfy that. And God is faithful because He brought Stacy into my life, and before too long, I started going to these churches with her. And one day, John DeBrine was speaking. I don't know if those of you who've been around for a while may have heard of the John DeBrine Ministries. He used to be on the Cape. He was speaking at Mullen Hill, and I went forward and committed my life to Christ. And I found out why. I found out why there was that hunger had been, that whole fog had been lifted. It's like, wow, this is awesome, And so I slowly began to grow. And when I was in high school, I had been into drugs a little bit. And some friends of mine were into smoking marijuana and doing a bunch of other stuff. And almost immediately after that, I laid that aside and I quit. In fact, a friend of mine who actually I'm still friends with today, he used to bring me to school. He picked me up as I'm in my senior year. He'd bring me to school with him, and it used to be that we would all just, before school, we'd all just fill the car with smoke, and just get high. But I stopped doing that. But one day we were on the way to school, and he got pulled over. They had been tracking him for a while, and they pulled us over, took us out of the car, searched the car, searched us. And he was good enough to say, "Do what you want with me, but he doesn't smoke." He quit, and I had quit. I had quit a few months earlier, and so they took him to jail, and they dropped me off in front of the high school. Which I thought was kind of interesting. I didn't even do that, but anyway. My mother saw a change in me almost immediately. She could see that my demeanor had changed, and there was something different. And so that piqued her interest. And not long after that, she came with me and Stacy to Calvary Chapel, I think it was, on Route 6 in Dartmouth, or it might be Westport. I think it was Westport. It was Randy that used to go there. I think he still goes there. Whatever. And she got saved there. And few years later, my parents moved to Florida. Oh, a year later, they moved to Florida. But a couple of years later, I went down and spent the winter there, and I got friendly with a pastor down there that had a very small church, and I helped him get it up and running and stuff. And we ended up ganging up on my father, and we we got him saved. So that was a long process too. But that's the way it is with all of us. It's a lifelong journey. So my parents went out in, like I said, when I was 18, I think. Yes, I was 18. It was in the dead of winter in January 1981. They ran out of heat in our house. We had no oil for heat, no money for oil in the house. There was no heat. They couldn't pay the bills. And out of desperation, my parents rented a trailer and moved to Florida. I had gone to electronics school, and after a couple of trimesters decided it wasn't for me. So I had a little money left over, and I offered it to them to help them get down there, and that's how they did it. And I ended up spending 10 years down there, and it was a nice place to visit. I spent a winter down there once painting, which was great. So yeah, all the while I was learning how to paint, and we all moved to Florida, but my brother and I didn't want to stay. We both had girlfriends up here. And so we came back a few months later, stayed with my grandmother, and then later on stayed with some friends up in North Dartmouth in the Hicksville area, who are still dear friends to this day. And actually, that's where I met my wife. The mother where I lived at the farm, we used to we had horses and the cow and some other animals, and all the duties that we do, do the hay in the summertime, and it was great. It was kind of fun. But the mother, she worked at a place. Codex was the name of the place in near Foxborough, and a friend of hers who also worked, they'd come down and they'd visit now and then and play cards, and they had some kids, and one of them was this 15-year-old, 14 or 15-year-old named Lisa. And they came over one time, and I had gotten friendly with the parents. I knew the parents before the kids, so I always had a good relationship with my in-laws. But they came over one time, and I didn't know this till years later, but the two sisters, my now wife, and her sister, was swimming in the pool at the place where I lived, and I came out of the house, and Lisa looked up at me and said to her sister, "You see him? That's the guy I'm going to marry right there." And I was clueless for like another 4 or 5 years after that. I didn't know, but God spoke to her. She had, she spoke that out, and sure enough, later on, that's what happened. But in the meantime, we did our things, went our ways. But about a year or two later, she called me up and asked me if I'd go to her junior prom, and I am 5 years older than her. So at the time, I was 21, I believe. This was in 84, maybe, somewhere in there. And so I figured, wow, here's this girl who's 5 years younger than me asking me to go to her junior prom. She must be desperate. So I couldn't say no, because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I figured I must have been her last resort, But so I said yes, and we went, and we had a great time, actually. And we made the best of it. We had fun. I ended up sleeping over her house that night because they lived in Attleboro and I lived in Dartmouth. The next day we went out with her parents and spent the day, but she was only 15 at the time, so it was like, that was it. Once I headed back home, in my mind, that was the end of that. It was a nice time, and that was it. But not to her. So I didn't see her for another couple of years, other than the occasional visit where I lived there when her family came down. But she ended up into a bad relationship. She ended up, when she was 17, almost 18, she had a boyfriend that her parents did not approve of, and her father being the hard-nosed man that he was a strict Italian, kind of old world Italian guy, even though he was American. He gave her an ultimatum: you either leave him or you leave the house. And she chose unwisely. She moved out and in with this guy, and turns out that the relationship became abusive. I'm only telling you this because it has to do with things that happen later in our lives, and I'll try to keep this as condensed as possible. But she got into an abusive relationship. It was physically abusive and mentally, verbally abusive, as well as other ways. So one day, me and my buddies liked to go skiing. I was into skiing at the time, and when she was 18. This was a year or two after the junior prom, almost 2.5 years. One day I was getting my stuff ready, and Lisa and her family came over, and the mother of the house where I lived, she took me aside, and she says, Lisa likes to ski. You got to ask her to go with you. And I said, oh man, because me and two of my buddies were going up early in the morning. I don't know if I want to drag her along, but I said, okay. So I asked her, and she said yes. So we went back to Attleboro and got our skis, and we showed up at 5 o'clock in the morning at my buddy's house, and the other two guys are like, "Who's this?" "Oh, nothing. She's just a friend." So, okay. So we went up to whatever mountain it was in New Hampshire skiing, and we kind of paired off. The other two guys, she was a little slower with skiing, so I stayed with her, and the other two guys went on ahead. I sacrificed my fun to stay with her. I hope she doesn't hear that. Anyway, so we get to talking and stuff, and we ended up kind of hitting it off, and well, by the end of the day, on the ride back, we were slightly more than friends. Let's just say that. we were kissing and stuff, and guys were in the back seat, and the guys are like, "Just friends, huh?" But that was the beginning of our relationship, and so we dated, and I began to. Because she lived in Attleboro. I had been going to church, various churches, and because she lived in Attleboro, I couldn't see her during the week. I was working, and it just didn't make sense to see her during the week. Then I had an idea. I said, well, I know a church that's kind of halfway between here and Attleboro. It's in Seekonk, in the storefront, and it's a pretty good place. There's this Texas preacher that preaches. He's pretty cool to listen to. So she was like, okay. So we started meeting on midweek service. We meet there, and we get to see each other. And she got to church. She'd go to church, and it was FCC. It was the beginnings of FCC when they were first at the storefront, and she got saved there, which was great. And then we founded a church in New Bedford as we were getting more serious, and then we were involved in a church for a number of years. We got married there and everything, so it was good. Anyway, so time went on. We got married in 1988. We had 2 kids. I bought a house first, and we had 2 kids, a son and a daughter. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I've gone up in stature this week. I am now a grandfather. My son had a baby. Well, his wife did. Yeah, and actually I got to hold him for the first time yesterday. It was great. Anyway, so my son and my daughter were born, and we ended up going from the church we were going to for 7 or 8 years. There was some issues there, so we ended up going back to FCC, where Lisa first got saved. And so we were making the drive from New Bedford, and we got involved with FCC. I was a care leader for I think 8 years. We was involved in several ministries. She was as well. She ended up working there for a number of years. So time went on. We got into it was the late 90s, I think it was, mid to late 90s, and one day after care group, I just finished teaching our care group, which was the connect group type groups that we had at FCC. At our house, we had it at our house. She sat down with a real serious look, and I guess whatever it was that we taught on convicted her. And she confessed to me that she had had a 2-year affair with someone that she worked with. Apparently, this person had come up to her one day and just, as she walked by, grabbed her and kissed her, and she didn't know how to handle that because of the issues with her father that she had with her overbearing father, and then the issues she had from that bad relationship. She was gripped with fear and didn't know what to say or how to handle it. And she tried to handle it herself. She couldn't. So that went on for 2 years before she finally had the courage to tell me about it. I was devastated when she told me. I was completely devastated. That was the one thing that could cut a person the deepest, at least to me, was that connection that you have with your wife. When that gets broken, when something comes in between that and steals that from you, that was very difficult. And we counseled with Pastor Dave, and we got into the reasons why it happened and how it happened and all these things. But and I told her when it happened, I said, this just can't happen again. This can't happen again. I don't know what I would do. I guess I'd have to divorce you. But we worked on it. We worked together a little bit, and we didn't address that much. We just kind of moved on. And looking back, that was probably a mistake. So a number of years went by, and she was still working at the church, and raising the kids and everything else. And then my son went off to college, and one day he was in Bangor, Maine. He was at New England School of Communications in Bangor, Maine. And I guess the previous weekend we'd all gotten together at Thanksgiving, and she had used his computer for something. She was trying to look for kittens. I guess somebody wanted a kitten, whatever it was. And somehow or other, he went to use his computer, and he found a whole bunch of correspondence, emails back and forth between Lisa, his mother, and someone else. I got a call at 3 in the morning one morning, and he told me, "Dad, I think something's happening here." And, so he told me about it, and I confronted her. Sure enough, it was another affair, and this one, excuse me, this one was really tough. It had gone on for 6 years, and it was with another coworker who just happened to be the pastor of the church. And the repercussions were huge, obviously. But what had happened was, when he had counseled us, he had seen the weaknesses, and he exploited them. And she didn't know how to defend against that. So anyway, that's all. He's since been forgiven, and we've moved on. But we worked at it this time, because at that point, my first words to her, "Well, I guess I have to divorce you now." I mean, what else? I didn't know what else to do. But a funny thing happened. We were scheduled to go to a Christmas concert, Mannheim Steamroller, a couple of nights later, the next night actually. And this was a Tuesday morning when it happened, when I found out. And this was a Wednesday night, and we went with a couple of friends from church, and we went out to eat first. And my stomach was so knotted up I couldn't even eat. And we sat there and made our way through the meal, and then we told our friends what had happened, and so it was very awkward. And we get out to the car, and we were getting ready to go to to the place where we were going to see the concert. And she says to me, "Did you see who came in?" I said, "No." She said, "He came in with his wife, the pastor and his wife, walked right by us." And I believe to this day, angels protected me from seeing that, because it uh, it could have been disastrous. I don't know what the reaction would have been, but I'm glad I didn't see that. I'm glad I didn't see him. Um, but the funny thing happened when we were at the concert. God began to speak to me, and a deep love came over me from my wife, even though I was hurting so much. God said, "I'm not through with you yet." He spoke to me. He said, "I'm not through with the two of you yet. I have work for the two of you to do." So over the course, I remember on the way home after that concert, I told her, I said, "Look, I know I said I was going to divorce you." I said, "But here's what I'm saying now. Knowing what God said to me," I said, "Honey, I'm willing to give this another chance if you are. The ball's in your court. If you decide you want to reconcile and do this, we'll do it." And it took her a day or two, but I already knew the answer. And she did. She came back and she said, "Yes, let's do this." And we counseled a little bit, but we went out and we got books that pertain to what happened, and we studied these books together. We'd read a chapter every night together. We did all kinds of things together. We really worked at it, and God has been faithful. He's been so faithful. Over the years, my love for her and her love for me has increased more than I ever thought it could have. And we're in love with each other to this day. Um, Another aspect of our lives was just before this happened, and I'm talking 13 maybe years ago. Another pastor that was associated was a regional pastor. He had a church in Warwick, but when we had the pastors' conferences at the church, he used to come to the church with the other pastors, and my wife would coordinate all of that stuff. Working in the church, she would coordinate that. And she says to me, "You got to meet this guy. He's a great guy, and he's got a gull wing too." And I had a motorcycle gull wing, and said, "He rides too." Yeah. So eventually I met him, and we ended up golfing together a couple times, and we ended up riding together, the four of us, him and his wife, and me and my wife. And so we got to be friends, not really close yet, but every now and then we'd see each other. Well, around the same time that Lisa and I went through the crisis that we went through, he did as well. His wife had also had an affair. He was the pastor of the church. His wife was the music leader. And she had an affair with someone she worked with, but she decided to leave. She decided to go and marry this other guy. So she took the church down. She basically caused a split in the church, and they closed it. This poor guy, he lost, and he wanted to reconcile with her, but she wouldn't. So he lost his church, his wife, his church, his job, his house. He had to sell his house, and even his dog. She took the dog. I see you yawning there, Phil. Try and stay awake. Anyway, this is kind of pertinent to the rest of the story, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible. He was devastated. He lost everything, and then right after that, he got into a bad motorcycle accident, almost got killed. And so there was just nothing left for him. So Lisa and I were friendly with him, and through the years, we remained friendly with him, and we helped him in a few situations. And he eventually met another woman, a Christian woman, and got remarried. We watched as God restored that. We watched as God restored. He got a beautiful wife, and then they bought a house, and they got another dog, and he got a stable job and everything. And it was a joy over the past 12 years to watch some of these things come to pass. But over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been praying for and hope waiting for the last piece of that puzzle to come in, and it really didn't make much sense to us to care that much. Why would we care about whether or not he got? But something was tugging at our hearts, and we were waiting and praying and waiting. And eventually, he had a Bible study at his house, and we'd go to Connecticut for the Bible study, and every other week. And about 4 years ago, we finally signed papers. Excuse me, actually forming the church with the taxes and everything. And then we began thinking about and looking for a place, a building, and everything else. And even though we didn't really have a congregation yet, church, but um, we finally, last October, we leased a building in Connecticut, and we began working on it. It was a gym, a fitness center, and so we transformed it into a church. And it was around, I guess, November, December, where we started to realize that this is really going to happen, and we are going to be a part of it. And we really weren't expecting that for sure. We were to the point in our lives now where the kids were growing up and out of the house, and all of a sudden, we realized that God's calling us to move to Connecticut. So we had to start looking for a house. We searched for months. We'd come back and forth on weekends looking at houses. And just after Christmas, after the first of the year, we put our house up for sale, and it sold in 3 weeks, which left us in a place. Oh, great! Now what are we gonna do? We hadn't found a house yet. All the while, I forgot to mention that my brother, whom I worked with most of my adult life, passed away just before Christmas. I think most of you guys know that. And so that kind of complicated things a little bit. But anyway, so we signed papers on February 24th, I think it was. So we had to move out of the house by the 23rd. And we moved to a little cottage in Connecticut, a place that has these motels and brand new cottages that they had. They were really nice. And we were there for about a week and a half, and my wife found bed bugs. So we had to get out of there and go through the whole process of getting everything washed and cleaned and everything else. And so we found another place, and it was dog friendly because we do have a dog. And it was right next to the church that we were trying to open up. And of course, here comes the COVID thing, and we had one church service, and then everything got closed down. So the church was just about to get started, and boom, everything got shut down. So here we are with a church building that costs about $2,400 a month to lease, with no income, nothing, nobody, nothing. So then God kind of put it into my heart. Wait a minute, we're at this motel right next door that's charging us $483 a week to stay at, which is exorbitant. And it was just a little, I don't want to go there. Anyway, I said, wait a minute. We can move into the church. They've got a little kitchenette. They've got plenty of bathrooms and showers there because it was a fitness center. And we can help pay the lease because, 3, 6, 9, 12. I mean, ended up paying for half of that lease while we were there. I believe God brought this together so that not only can we prosper, but the church can prosper, because little did we know that we were really going to be that much of an integral part of it. I've left out so much of my life, my painting career, my work career, which isn't much of one. But I wanted to stress this part of our lives, because this to me is the most important thing. We really didn't see it coming in it, but we did, and God has been so faithful. We were homeless for about 14 weeks. And most of that time we were able to actually stay at the church. So we were in relative comfort. You saw me as I attended some of the Zoom meetings here, sitting just like I am now, but at the church. And it worked out really well. And then a few weeks ago, Pastor Chuck had a date to speak at another church, and said, "How would you guys feel about doing a service?" You know, my wife doing the music for was YouTube. We're doing the music from YouTube and downloading it and all that on the system. But and he asked me to do the message. So this is not something I ever thought we'd do. What I left out was, after we reconciled, my wife and I, we had to leave FCC, the church we were going to, because of the split and everything that happened when the pastor had to leave. And long story, but I wasn't allowed to go back for a couple of years. And so in the meantime, we went to Pastor Ken's church, Pastor Ken Bongiorno, who gave his testimony 2 weeks ago. And they were gracious. My parents had gone there. In fact, one of them was, I think my father was still going here and there. And they accepted us in, and we started into helping out with ministry there. And one of the things we did was we started a married couples ministry. And for 5 years we did that. And we realized that was what God was calling us to. When God spoke to me after what had happened and said, "I'm not through with you yet," we started to see more clearly that this was what he wanted to use us for in this way in ministries. So this has been on our hearts for a number of years now, working with couples and stuff. We did that for 5 years, and I loved it. We saw some miraculous things happen in people's lives. So now I'm in a place where that's going to be a big part of what we're doing, as well as who knows whatever else God wants us to do. But it's been a whirlwind of a year. It really has. And God has blessed us. So in fact, my message yesterday was titled, "He is faithful," and he sure is faithful, because he's been faithful with us. He blessed us with a house here. We bought this house after all that we went through looking for houses and dealing with the mortgage company and everything else. We bought this house for $120,000. We got almost an acre and a half of land, 2-stall garage, 2 floors here. We're in heaven here. This is great. We love it. God has blessed us so much. And well, you know, I miss being able to see guys like you guys there back home, which we're not able to get together anyway. But, you know, there are people back home I miss, but the sacrifice has been worth it. And we're so excited. And the one last thing I'd like to say is that when I mentioned when I was in high school and I had that yearning, knowing that there has to be something more, and there was an emptiness, there was just that desire to get more, to get more of him. It was filled to a point back then when I got saved. But I find now, within the past year or so, that the Holy Spirit is tugging on me so much more. I can't get enough of him. I listen to Pastor John's CDs all the time. I'm commuting still back and forth to Rhode Island and Massachusetts at work. It's an hour and a half each way every day. And I get a lot of time to listen to teaching tapes, and then not tapes, but CDs. And my heart is just, I can't get enough. And God we're starting to see how God is so good. He has blessed us in so many ways. I'm sure I missed a lot, but that's my story.